Right. I'll return to you shortly to find out what ought to be done now and immediately. There are those who have raised the questions that the president, who is the commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces, has been terribly disappointing, that he had not a single word for this in his State of the Nation address. And since then, he has said absolutely nothing. Not even to start with, express, grief with the family that has lost their young boy, and to talk about what the army have done. There are those who say that in any civilized country, in any country worthy of the name a democracy, by now, many heads would have rolled and the soldiers involved would have been standing, going through a process by now. Professor Kwesi Aning, do I have you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Right. So, Prof, I remember when Major Mahama was murdered. I had you on this show, and my production had to help take off some footage, on the screens, because I just couldn't help it. I just couldn't hold my tears back when we're talking about him at the time. I have to do this job, but I can assure you that as I look at these pictures, it just doesn't help me. I wish that we would not be playing them back. What's going through your mind as you saw these pictures and you continue to see them this morning on this television?
There was a sense of shock, of sadness, and a sense of failure. Failure not in the context of that we could not prevent it, but failure in the sense that all the hard work that has been done to try to build a society in which those in service understand their role for what it is. That when we use taxpayers' money to train you, to feed you, to educate you, arm you, that your role is to serve. But service also has a synergistic relationship, that those who are served accept that service and in return have a dialogic, consensual, respectful, collaborative relationship. And my dismay at the failure is that after almost 20 years or so of hard work seeking to build and improve civil-military relations, I think you've cited 10 cases, that we don't seem to be learning any lessons at all. And the failure is not only from the military side. The failure is also from the civil or civilian oversight side. And I want particularly here, and I think my brother Etua has taken us, through the history, the rule of law side. But I think we need to understand that what also took place is part of that long cultural, historical struggle within the army itself to move away from the Bomkutuku mentality we've always applied the Bomkutuku, and this I'm borrowing from Raymond Atububa culture that says, I'm not going to argue with you. I'll give you a couple of very dirty slaps, and that will change you. So if we do a discourse analysis of what we heard in the film, Monsieur Nyansa, I will teach you sense, so that next time you will behave differently. Now, when someone says, Monsieur Nyansa, learn to be either wise, intelligent, or behave in a particular way, whilst that same person is flouting your rights, then it creates a particular type of danger, because it tells you the way that threats are constructed and how enemies are imagined and reimagined. So, Monsieur Nyansa is a phrase used by probably somebody who doesn't even know what instructions he has been given, apart from go to Ashaiman, arrest some people, blah, blah, blah. The other point I want to raise is the excessive inflation in the use of the word or the words intelligence-led. When we say something is intelligence-led, then it is sharp, pinpointed, specific, and deliberate. So an intelligence-led operation that seizes 184 people, brutalized, and if you see the picture of those guys lying in mud, and there's a particular way in which during war you treat people in ways that dehumanizes and takes away their sense of self-respect and humanity. So when you let them, yes, this particular picture, when you let them wade in mud, excuse my language, like pigs, what you do is that you seek to dehumanize those that you are brutalizing and teaching sense to, so that you create societies of fear and societies of abuse, where that abuse is respected and accepted as the norm. So there's a historicity to this. But Samson, part of my pain and this abiding sense of failure also relates to the discursive language used by our political class. So the Parliamentary Committee on Defense and Interior sympathizes not with the family, but with the Ghana Armed Forces as an institution for losing one of their personnel. That is okay. But then the Parliamentary Committee then says, look, we need to be careful about how we handle this case so we don't worsen it. That is not the way oversight must be done. Oversight, and particularly parliamentary oversight, dealing with interior, defense, and intelligence is about ensuring that the public faith in these institutions are kept.
Yeah. Prof, you are referring to a committee that spoke to the nation through its chairperson.
Yeah.
And who said they had to be careful not to say things that will inflame passions or suggest that they are supporting one side against the other.
Yeah. But that's not how...
Does that chairperson command the credibility to be making those statements? And have you followed him after he made those statements of caution? What else he has said on TV and radio?
No, Samson, I've been chasing Al-Qaeda as it comes down south. So for the past couple of weeks, that is what I've been doing.
I don't think you should take him seriously, with the greatest of respect.
No, we should, because that statement will be looked at by the International Parliamentary Union, and they will say, oh dear.
But Prof, this is a man who sits on television,
yes,
and over the Ejura shootings, where the military once again were faulted for killing, he sits on radio and TV and says that a journalist should be beaten. And he had said this before. This is not his first time. He says that if I were the president, I would grab this journalist and beat the hell out of him. This is the man that is worthy of chairing such a sensitive committee in Parliament and leading them to talk at this time, and you want me to take him serious?
Because the rest of the world is looking at the position that he occupies. And the rest of the world is saying, okay, this is how Ghana wants to do oversight. This is how, under Ghana's democratic dispensation, respect for human rights and the rule of law must be contextualized. So irrespective of what we think within the Ghanaian domestic space, this is a reputational issue for this country. So that when citizens are brutalized, when citizens live in societies of fear because the institution that is supposed to protect them become instruments of threat, then those who ought to play that oversight role and don't seem to want to do so because it's not a time to make utterances that may inflame passions. The rest of the world then says, hang on, what is happening here? So what has taken
Prof, sorry, but this small bit, and because you are putting such, such leverage, or I don't know how else to describe it, on what such a person says, but the whole world also knows that this same person has called for arms, has asked one tribe to hit the other, and has actually been prosecuted by this state for those, very, very reckless comments. So why should that person be the one to lead a parliamentary committee to say anything for anyone to take them serious?
Well, Samson, unfortunately, the Republic of Ghana and the party that he represents thinks this person is the most competent. But I think we need to move from the person and say, how must parliamentary oversight be done? Because there are other people who also sit on this same committee who are loudly silent from the other side. You see, so what I'm saying is that there's a general failure of Parliament to be seen to be playing its oversight role and assuaging the fears of the people of this republic. And
Prof, what can Parliament do where many say the commander-in-chief has failed, completely failed? In less than 3 years, 10 accounts of the military storming and brutalizing innocent citizens because someone's phone is lost.
Yeah, quite it. But Samson, there's even a more disturbing thing that we've swept under the carpet. The military invasion of Parliament prior to the last inauguration of the president. Now, so there's a much bigger issue that we are looking at. What role must the army play in a democracy? And how can the oversight institutions play the role that serves as a check, monitors how they work, and how the institutions, the council, blah, 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 how do they work to ensure that there's a collaborative relationship that inures to the benefit of the people? But Samson, my last point. When an institution says we are using an intelligence-led operation to flush out those who have threatened and murdered a young official, and taking into consideration where we are located, the increasingly downward movement of terrorist groups, and knowing that in Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Niger, Chad, that the spread of extremist violence is directly and positively correlated to how statutory security forces treat their citizens, then I think the Ghana Armed Forces did not do.
Prof, there are those who say, and I'm already getting comments, people asking me, how can a lawyer be asking whether what is happening is justified? My job here is not to tell you that I'm a lawyer. My job here is to play the devil's advocate. So when I ask Professor Appiagyei that can this be justified, that's not my opinion, it's a question. Because there's a section of the public there that are being told by respected people, including ex-military or security officers, that this is justified. In fact, they are saying that Ashaiman we are playing the ostrich because it's quote unquote a den of criminals. And therefore, if the military has to use this kind of approach to weaken them, to beat them down, we should support it.
I take very strong exception to my dear friend, Dr. Norman. There is nowhere in this world where the military should routinely go out there and teach people a lesson. So if I had gone to Ashaiman with my students to say, how do we better understand hybrid forms of security provision and how communities that live on the fringes of society seek to provide themselves with some security, my students and I would have been caught in this brutality. And therein lies the danger when people say, oh, the routine use of violence to intimidate and to sow fear is legitimate. It can never be legitimized, because I know myself that were something to happen, I can tell you something. I will receive a couple of very dirty slaps. And as an old man, I cannot run very far. So I know my life will be at risk. And that's why it's crucial and important that the rule of law and the respect for human rights must always be at the center of these conversations and the way that we behave as people serving the Republic of Ghana. But
Prof,
you see, if Al-Qaeda came to Ashaiman now, or Islamic State, and said, look, we want to recruit, what do you think would happen? And I think some heads must roll, because the brutalities that we've seen has heightened the vulnerabilities that we already face. And I'm hoping
which are these heads that must roll?
I mean, when somebody says that the military high command sanctioned it, so who in the high command planned this intervention? And what were the rules of engagement? Were the rules of engagement in such a manner that you go out there and use violence to seek to get the information? Because if the Ghana Police Service has been able to get access to the information that is needed without this undue brutality, then we need to raise and ask some really very...
Head that must roll. We all know in decent communities, many resignations would have been flying already. Where this is not happening, whose job is it to ensure that whose head, is rolling?
Well, Samson, you know that in this country, I remember His Excellency the President as candidate, Akufo-Addo, always used to say, the buck stops with the president. So certainly, as Commander-in-Chief, he must be asking, what are the risk and threat assessments that were made prior to this intelligence-led operation? in terms of how the operation was carried out, what can be the unintended fallout for the wider security of Ghana? And I can say very confident, sitting where I am sitting, that the unintended fallout is very negative. Because if you listen to the discourse, if you talk to people, if you put your ears to the ground, people are frustrated, people are angry, people want to...
Prof, you keep using the expression intelligence operation.
Yeah.
Intelligence operation. And earlier you have suggested there's nothing intelligent about the operation. Because as we understand from the residents, they just were going around, they were not actually sure where exactly they were going, and they were picking people from various points and taking them to one point, asking them to, as it were, get on the floor, do press-ups, roll over in the mud, and we have seen all the bruises all over the people. An intelligence operation picks up as many as 184 suspects.
Yeah.
And in the end, all of them released. Should you continue to use the expression intelligence operation?
Oh, that is their word or their physiology. But the way we are describing it means that they've got to come back to us with maturity, with humility, and then say, we got it wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. The continued insistence that this was an operation, intelligence-led operation, makes that physiology laughable. And I think it puts us in a very tight spot. I think there are several cases where operations do go wrong. Okay? And I think there have been some intimations that, yes, the operation did not pan out as had been planned. So we should take the next step and begin the process of reconciliation, of rebuilding bridges, and of asking ourselves some very fundamental questions. How do we create trust in this very crucial institution that we still do need?
We were informed, and the police have now confirmed that they have arrested key suspects in the murder of Imoro Sharif, and that it took them a week of sustained intelligence-led operation to arrest the suspects they say are involved in the murder. We are told that this was already known at the time the military went to do what they did. What do you know, sir?
Well, I think the key question now is about the sequencing of how this information is being fed to the public in trickles. And therein lies the mistrust, therein lies the public's concern as to where lies the truth. And I think it is crucial that the institutions involved themselves, come clean and say something went wrong.
Initially, the suggestion was that, and this will be my final question before I go to Professor PJ. The suggestion was that there is general mistrust in the police, in the police's competence to fish out those who committed this very dastardly act. And the belief is that if the military went in there, they will be successful. Of course, by the police's statement, this kind of projection has been defeated. But is that the case?
Well, months ago, the Inspector General of Police spoke about historical perceptions about the police. And I think if the police have gone in decode them, and use sustained intelligence-led operations over the span of 1 week without brutalizing anyone, then I think they have done well. And I think it shows in sharp relief the lack of coordination, the lack of trust, the lack of sharing of information amongst statutory security institutions.
Prof, will it be a question of lack of sharing of information, or that the military simply needed to do this at all costs, whether or not they were aware that somebody had been picked up?
Samson, at all costs, and to what end? The military is not an island unto itself. The military has been established to protect the sanctity of the state.
Yes, but you dare not touch any member, any person in uniform. That's the point they are showing you.
Oh yes, that is the point they intend to show. And I think we do agree that every life is sacrosanct, and that somebody being in uniform must under no conditions make that person more susceptible to violence. That is not acceptable. But the military itself must accept that the rationale for the establishment of military repelling external threats is beginning to change. That now the threat is from within, increasingly. And that these types of actions from Ejura, Wa, and all the 10 cases is creating an understanding or a perception that the realization that the threat is also domestic, and therefore the way we treat citizens is crucial and critical to not exacerbating the frustrations of citizens that can lead to recruitment and radicalization. Probably is not well understood. They must understand it, that actions have consequences, and that we cannot have a combination of both the external and the internal conflating to create insecurities for the general community.
Right. Let me go.